Thank you for coming. I'm Abigail Rokison-Woodall, and this is, of course, Simon Russell Beale. We're general editors, along with Professor Michael Dobson, of the new Arden Shakespeare Performance Editions. And we're delighted to be here today to talk a little bit about those, and also we thought about the process of editing Shakespeare, in particular, editing Shakespeare for performance. So the Arden Performance Editions are editions that we've designed particularly for use in the rehearsal room. And we thought we'd talk you through a little bit of our thinking in a minute. So I'm going to start by looking at the history of the acting or performance edition. But first, I'm going to hand over to Simon to tell you something about how and why he got involved in the series as a general editor.
I'll tell you where it started. I started with absolutely no knowledge of this at all. And like a lot of people in this country, I was given Shakespeare to study at school, and I assumed that that book you got was set in stone, wasn't it? It was just, that was Hamlet, that was Macbeth, that was... And I sort of carried that with me right the way through. I wasn't really very interested in things until I was doing Hamlet here on this stage, actually. And we were doing a Q&A session very like this one. And in our version of Hamlet, we'd cut Fortinbras. For those of you who don't know Hamlet, he's a character that comes in at the end. He's not a hugely major character, but he's quite an important character. Anyway, we cut him completely for various reasons, which we'll go into later if you want. And a lady in the audience, sitting in the front row, put up, a very elegant lady, she put up her hand and said, why have you cut Fortinbras? Very reasonable question. And then she said, and I gave my answer, then she said, I think you should do the script as it is written. And I suddenly thought, gosh, that's a loaded statement, and I don't know how to reply to it. So I got into finding out how these scripts end up being printed in various books.
So when we had set out to do an acting edition, one of the things I thought was, well, what's come before us in terms of acting or performance editions? And the concept of an acting edition of Shakespeare is certainly not new. Acting editions of Shakespeare's plays appeared from as early as the end of the 17th century. But they differed in an important respect from ours, in that they sought to put the play as it was acted by a particular theatre company onto the stage. So here we've got Davenant's Macbeth. This was essentially an adaptation. It was severely cut. It was substantially rewritten, as you can see. It's got additions and new songs.
It was a musical, wasn't it?
It was a musical. It was basically a musical. And one thing you'll notice is that Shakespeare's name doesn't appear on the title page. Davenant's The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark is printed 2 years after Macbeth in 1676, and it's quite different in form. So again, here it is. It's advertised as presenting the play as it is now acted at His Highness the Duke of York's Theatre. But it's actually marked up to indicate the performance text. So we get this little note, this play being too long to be conveniently acted. Such places as might be least prejudicial to the plot or sense are left out upon the stage, but that we may no way wrong the incomparable author are here inserted according to the original copy with this mark. It essentially, it seems to be trying to privilege the stage and the author kind of equally. The next major edition of Hamlet that we get is the what's known as the Wilkes-Hughes text of 1718. This is as it is now acted by His Majesty's servants. And this became the standard performance edition, acting text, and basis for prompt books for over a century. So I suppose one of the things that's significant in what we're saying is that there were probably some lines and some words from Hamlet that were not spoken on the stage for maybe as much as 150 years, because this had become the standard performance, this Wilkes-Hughes edition became a kind of standard performance edition. But then in 1773 to 4, we get Bell's acting edition of Shakespeare. This is 9 volumes. This is sort of the first proper acting edition of Shakespeare. It's got notes by a man called Francis Gentleman, and it publishes the plays as they are now performed at the Theatres Royal in London, regulated from the prompt books of each of the houses by permissions. And what's interesting about Bell's text is that it seems to see one of its principal tasks as being to preserve in print what it thinks are the superior versions of Shakespeare, which are being performed by the theatres, versions which have been corrected of faults. And I'll let Simon read this piece because it's such fun. Yes, I'll put it up. Oh, there we are.
There is no doubt that all our author's faults must justly be attributed to the loose, quibbling, licentious taste of his time. That's Shakespeare, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
He, no doubt, upon many occasions wrote wildly, merely to gratify the public. As Dryden wrote bombastically and Congreve obscenely to indulge the humour and engage the favour of their audiences. The above considerations first started the idea and induced the undertaking of this edition, and as the theatres, especially of late, have been generally right in their opinions, omissions, of this author particularly, we have printed our text after their regulations. It's brilliant, isn't it?
It is.
Absolutely brilliant.
It's rather nice because they're sort of saying, but of course, it wasn't Shakespeare who was choosing to do this. You know, no doubt if he had lived in our more genteel times, he might have written more.
Though he did write merely to gratify the public.
Yes.
I mean, there's a marvellous line in Hamlet, he's fat and scant of breath, which was marvellous for me. And I always imagined that sort of later on during Burbage's playing of Hamlet, he'd been playing it for a couple of years by then, he'd had a few too many beers, and Shakespeare was going, God, blimey. It's in the fight scene, this line. God, look at him. We've got to register it. We've got to acknowledge this, haven't we? He's fat and scant of breath, right?
We also, interestingly, get some commentary which is aimed at performers or directors. And we'll ask Simon to read this one, because this is the note we get on the sort of person who should play Hamlet.
The personage of Hamlet should be a good, if not a striking figure, with very flexible, spirited, marking features, a sonorous voice, capable of rapid climaxes and solemn gradations. It's fantastic, isn't it? I tick all those boxes.
So these Bell's editions got used for 2 or 3 decades in the theatre as the basis for prompt bookmaking. And then they were replaced by various other editions, Kemble's edition, other standard acting editions that contained the plays as they were performed at one of the major theatres. Some of them have got quite elaborate stage directions. Some of them record the action. Some of them also give us lists of costumes. So both Cumberland's edition and Charles Keane's edition give us this rather fascinating list of costumes.
Hamlet, black velvet doublet with square neck, black velvet trunks and circular robe lined with purple satin, and broad bugle trimming, some will know that, with large gold cord and tassels, black silk hose shoes and roses, black coronet cap with black feathers. I mean, it's very, very detailed.
The assumption is that, this is here if you
want to be really good in this play.
If you want to be really good at it, you want to do this. There were some further acting editions of individual plays published in the late 19th and early 20th century, but they gradually dropped out of use because professional productions started to use more academic editions of the plays, fully published play texts, and essentially deciding to make their own cuts, which is still really, to this day, what tends to get used in the theatre. But of course, the most famous 20th century acting edition, not only of Shakespeare's plays, but many others, is of course French's acting editions. These might be familiar to people.
French's editions, were they, even 30 years ago, was,
Yeah,
yeah,
pretty standard.
yeah, standard editions.
They're fascinating, these French's editions, I think. This is the Hamlet that closely follows the version prepared by Johnston Forbes Robertson. And it's a bit like, the text is a bit like those very early acting editions, in that you've got pretty much the whole of Hamlet, but you've got square brackets around the bits that Sir Johnston Forbes Robertson didn't do, and you probably wouldn't want to do either. But they do leave very little. I mean, if we're talking about the Keene text as starting to be quite prescriptive, you've got 2 columns, and you've got the words, essentially, the text. And then you've got these notes, which are basically telling you exactly what to do with it. I'm going to ask Simon to read number 4 here.
4, an indication of apprehension in the manner of Bernardo in respect of the apparition of the king must be registered from the outset. Bernardo's "who's there" should not be given as an ordinary challenge, but as though the man had superstitious dread. When I was doing King Lear, the last lines of King Lear are "look there, look there." And I was talking to a friend of mine called Sonia Massai, who's a great academic, fellow academic. And we were talking about the last line of "look there, look there." And it's always glossed as being somehow, he's got, his dead daughter in front of him, as somehow being a redemptive moment, a moment of hope. Perhaps he's seeing her breathe, perhaps he's seeing her in heaven, perhaps, a whole range of sort of, look there, look there. And suddenly, it was halfway through the performance, and I suddenly thought, what if it's saying to the people around him, look at that. Look at the corpse of my daughter. And I'm not saying I'm particularly brilliant, but you've flipped the whole meaning round, haven't you? In which case you sort of, if for the next night I played it up to that point, you'd have to sort of play it up to that point. That's where you'd be leading up to. You wouldn't be leading up to a redemptive. And because I was very keen that King Lear should not be a sort of redemptive play, because I don't think it is particularly, that was like a significant reversal of a line for me as a performer. And it suddenly made me realise that all these lines for modern actors have, and they must have done for these actors as well, a whole range of possible options depending on where you wanted to go with it.
Absolutely. When I was looking at some of these, thinking, what do we want to do with acting editions? And thinking, most companies now probably don't want everything blocked for them. Probably even most amateur companies I've seen performing in recent years have been very imaginative in their productions. Most schools, most drama schools, somebody actually wants to come up with these ideas. So I suppose where we were coming from was that we looked through this history of performance editions and thinking, actually, these are not really performance editions for actors. They're mostly these performance editions for, as you say, a memento of a production. So we started to think, what is it actors need and want?
Well, thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you.
We've run out of time. Thank you.